quickly show how I throw a leather sheath together for one of my knives. You basically start with, I use this manila folders because they're stiff and rigid, and you're going to want to line up the knife along the folded edge and trace a line around the knife. And then a good rule of thumb, at least for what I do, is I have a pair of calipers. You could use a ruler as well, but about 10 millimeters is about what I try to do. And I mark a line all the way around the edge. And this piece is going to be for our welt. And then we're going to measure the thickness of the handle, not in this dimension, but the other dimension this way. And whatever thickness that is, you're going to add, my particular one was 17 millimeters, so I'm going to add the 10 to the 17 to get 27, and that way it gives you some extra room here. And as you can see, I start basically down here, but then trace the line around the handle, and that gives you some extra width around here for the thickness of your handle. Then once you have your line drawn out around your knife, you cut it out, and then it basically, it's the bottom of the folder, so now you've got your template. Another good thing you can do while you're at this stage is to actually just put your knife in it. Feel it, see if it has enough room over here. My particular one, and it's kind of cool, I guess you can kind of see through it a little bit. To get it in the right light, you can see the blade there, but you want to make sure that you have enough room for your welt to go around here, and that your the back part here is touching enough to where you can put your welt in there and still get it sewn. And then that way, as we progress, get the leather cut out and get it stitched together, we'll have enough room for the knife to slide in and out. It's a little bit trickier too when you're doing knives that aren't straight. This one's kind of a drop point with a recurve, but this part sticks out pretty far from the knife, so we know that as this goes in, this particular point here is going to be our tallest point, and so we need to make sure that as it goes in, that's clearing, basically clearing everything. So pretty simple, and you can play around with the design to kind of get a cool outline. You can kind of do your lines, so swoop them in and out a little bit to kind of get the profile how you want it. But once you get there, then you're ready to open it up, throw it on your choice of leather, and cut it out. Now that we've got the leather cut out, we're just going to cut out the welt, which will just be a thin strip that follows the pattern of the outside, about 10 millimeters thick. And to do that, I like to use up the scrap pieces that I have from previous ones, and just find a piece that'll work, and trace the outline of your template, and then measure out 10 millimeters down and follow that curve, and then we'll get that cut out. Now that we got the welt cut out for our sheath, it's pretty much ready to be glued on, and I just use this Masters all-purpose cement to glue both sides, fold it over, and it really only takes a little bit of pressing to get it to stick. Before we do that, I'm gonna take this little tool, forget what it's called, edge beveler maybe, and just kind of thin out this middle and take some of this leather out along this middle line, and that'll help to kind of fold it over a little better, and it won't make it so thick along the back of the spine. I almost forgot to, before we glue up this welt on here, we're going to cut out just a little rectangle for a belt buckle. I found that that's easier to sew on the back before you glue it up. Obviously you need to be able to do that before it's closed over, or you can't stitch it. But a good general rule of thumb, at least for me and what I prefer, is to be anywhere from 1.5 to 2 inches wide, and then the length, depending upon what size belt you have. Mine's about 1.5 inches, so I give myself that 1.5 inches plus another 1/2 inch or so for the stitch lines, and then it also will depend on which way you want to carry it, if you're left-handed or right-handed. So when mine's done, it'll be like this, and I'm right-handed, so it'll be on my right hip. So I'm going to want the belt buckle to be on the back, or the belt loop to be back here. Alright, once we have the belt loop glued onto the back, I just use a little stitching trident. I don't know what they're called. But anyway, just put them on the edge here and line them up where you want the stitches to be. And sometimes it's good to kind of pre-poke holes to see where you're going to land, meaning if you're going to run out of space or not. That one looks pretty good. So anyway, yeah, just line them up the holes. Then I use a big hammer to knock through both of the pieces of leather, and then we'll get it stitched. As you can see, it pokes through the back there, and then you just pull it out, and then you have a hole all the way through both sides that you can stitch. Now we'll do that to the bottom, and then we'll get the rest of the welt put on and glued up. Now that we've got both sides punched for the belt loop, it is time to go ahead and sew it up. For this particular sheath with the knife, because the knife is got some darker parts to it, the handle and the edge, I've decided that we're going to probably stain this sheath a really dark color, either a dark brown or probably black. Honestly, probably go a mix of black and brown. But anyway, I'll use the wax thread, and we're using a black color. And people have said a good rule of thumb is to go 6 or 7 lengths past the area you're trying to stitch. So for this one, it's roughly 2 inches. So we'll do 2 times 6. That'll get us to 12 inches. So we'll pull out about 1 foot, and we'll go ahead and give it a cut, and that should be plenty to get this little run here, and then we'll do it again for the top one. Now to start this stitch, we basically have a needle on either end of the string, and we're going to feed it into one side, pull it through, and then get about even length away. And then we're going to do the saddle stitch, which is basically just in through one side, and you pull it through till it's somewhat tight, and then you grab the other side, this side over here, and you go back through that same hole that you just came through, and pull it out the other side. And now we're going to pull it tight. And then we're going to repeat that process in the same step, starting with this side, going to the next open hole, poking through, setting this to the side, and then grabbing our back side and going through that exact same hole we just went through, pulling it through the other side, and then pulling it tight. And we're going to do that all the way till we get up to the top. Now on the very last one, we've got to the very top of the hole, and the one that was on the outside of the sheath, I have just gone through back down below to the next one and come over this way so that both of our strings are now facing the inside. And I feel like that's a pretty decent way to end it, because then you don't really see where the strings end from the outside, and you can trim off just a little bit here and use a lighter to burn and kind of set that waxed thread there. Alright, so we got the belt loop stitched on there, and you can see here we cut the rest of the threads towards the inside, just trimmed them close, took a lighter and melted them, and then pushed them in so that they would stick back to the other threads. Then we've got the welt glued on to one side here, just using the all-purpose cement. And so now, now that we've got it all lined up and we've got this part skived out so that it will make an easier fold, we'll go ahead and glue the other side. The first couple that I did here, I tried my best to get them all to line up, but I found it's a little bit easier if you have your welt to stick out a little proud of both of your sides, and then that way when you're done you can go back and trim it up even on the top, and then that way you get a real consistent thick edge once you're done and you go to burnish the leather. So anyway, I'm gonna get this other side glued up, and then we'll be ready to punch holes and get it stitched. Alright, now that we've got all of our stitching holes punched with the stitching iron, they don't quite turn out as good on the back. I had to use just like an awl here to kind of poke out some of these holes just to open them up some. It'll just make it a little bit easier when you go to hand stitch it. But anyway, now that we have got that line down here, we're ready to stitch this. And so again, I've just put a needle on each side of the thread, and the thread is about roughly 6 times this length. Actually did a little bit more just to be safe, but for me, I'm going to start basically up here at the top and just start doing the saddle stitch all the way down. I'll cut it back on when we're done with that and show you where we're at. Alright, so Now that we've reached this step where we've got our stitches in right along the edge through both sides of the sheath and the welt, and we've got our belt buckle sewn, it's now time to basically go through and trim up the excess. We're going to cut this part off, kind of bevel these edges so that it's nice and smooth, and then same thing for this. As you can see, none of them are really all that level, so we're just going to go through. You can either use a knife and just kind of basically run it along and cut it, or you can use a belt grinder. Also have another one down here that I could use, and we'll probably do a combination of the two to knock everything back even here before we go through and slick it up with water. I think it's also worth noting that if you're going to be using some sort of a belt grinder, that it's probably a good idea to have a designated belt just for your leather. Have a tendency to have the belts get pretty clogged up and dirty with either metal or wood or whatever you're working with, and it's something that you really don't necessarily want on your leather, because it will kind of show a little bit. So I make sure I have a fresh belt on here, and then we get to going. Another thing I should mention too is, as you're doing this, the leather is going to have a tendency to kind of leave a little bit of skin, some of the skin part sort of flapped over. I know it's probably hard to see that there, but it does have a tendency to leave this little thin bit here, and that's okay. We can trim that off once we're done. We're basically just trying to cut it back to where it is all even. All three layers are going to be even, and that's going to make for a better looking finish. So I've got a little bit more to do, but once I get this step done, we'll run back inside and we'll show you the next step. All right, now that we got the knife wrapped up in this cling wrap or this clear plastic stuff, we're just going to take our sheath. We're going to get a little bit of just tap water. We're going to go ahead, just put a little bit down it. We'll get a little bit on the sides up top, and then we're going to let all that water come back out. And then I just normally do the top half. You can do the whole thing, it just takes a lot longer to dry. So I'm just doing the top half, since all we're really trying to do is just to kind of form it to the handle a little bit. So once you do that, you stick it in here and make sure it's about where you want it. And then you're just going to use your thumbs, and you're just going to kind of put it in here and kind of pinch around the handle a little bit. And that's going to get the leather to just kind of form around it a little bit and create basically just a little home for it inside the leather. This step isn't honestly necessary, and in fact you can skip this step and you'd still have a really good retention. I feel like when you do the water, it does have a tendency to kind of shrink a little bit, and then it has a little bit of looseness, so you want to make sure that you don't over pinch it. I feel like when you over pinch it, that tends to happen more. So really that's all we're doing, and you can kind of see the outline of the handle here just ever so slightly. And also, because we have the rock pattern texture on our handle, it's not smooth. It's going to have a lot of ridges and bumps, which in all honesty will probably even help it to get seated in the correct position. But now that we've done that, that's about all I plan to do for that step. We're gonna basically just take out the knife after it dries a little bit, and then leave it out in the sun to let it dry before we stain it. I guess at this point here where we're at with the sheath, we just kind of put some water on it to form. You could probably also go ahead and throw some water along the edge to get these 3 pieces of leather to kind of melt together. I think it's called burnishing the edge. But basically you can find any sort of like wooden handle. This one I bought at a arts and crafts store for like $1, which was awesome. But any sort of like round wooden handle or something to just create friction. And basically what we're doing is just wet the edge and then run this back and forth a lot to create friction and heat. And what that'll do is kind of help blend all of these layers in together a little bit better. And I think it's probably safe to say that you could go ahead and do that step now. Since the sheath is already wet from forming, we might as well just go ahead and do that. I feel like you want to do it before you stain, if you've chosen to stain after you've made the sheath. So, but basically, yeah, you're just gonna get it wet and just kind of go back and forth on it to create some friction. And after a while, you can really start to see some of the oils from the leather kind of rise to the surface. I guess that's what that is, oils rising to the surface. I'm not 100% sure, and I'm still fairly new at knife making and exploring, you know, sheath making and things, so I'm by no means an expert. But just, you know, making this video to show that, hey, this isn't rocket science, and anybody who has a desire to make a knife and make a sheath can do it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, and just finding some different videos online, you'll be able to, you know, figure some of those steps out. So, all right, now that the sheath has dried off a little bit, it's still wet up in the corners, which I find it to be okay. I'm pretty sure that these dyes are I don't think they're oil. I think they are water base. I could be wrong about that. I'm sure it says on here, but they don't seem to be oily. So having a little bit of water on there is not going to hurt it. Before we do that, I'm going to just kind of draw on my my logo, my maker's mark or whatever. So like here's another one that I've done, and you can see on the back up here, I've just got the mirrored F's just kind of stamped into the leather. I think this time I'll probably put it just on the actual belt loop. So I'll do that real quick and then we'll get it stained. And that's really all I'm after right there, is just the little F logo. This is going to be my personal knife, so you know, it doesn't have to be too super fancy or anything, but I think something like that for the most part is about what I'm after. I could do more, and I have done more in the past, but for this particular one, I think that this should be just fine. So just kind of take some time to indent it a little tiny bit more. So for this one, we're going to be doing a couple of different colors. The knife is relatively dark, so I've chosen this walnut color, and I've also got black. So I think we're going to do a combination of the both of them, honestly. I know that it'll probably be a little weird at first having both on there, but you know, I really think that
you know, having both and mixing them in kind of the right way will give it a dark look. I wanted it to be dark. I just didn't want it to be solid black. So hopefully by kind of mixing these two colors together, it'll be like a not so blackish looking dark color. And that's really kind of all I'm after, to be honest. So just going to take a little bit of time to go over it first with this walnut color, and then once to get all that coated, we'll throw on some of the black. And this is what happens when you buy cheap daubers. There we go. Just going to give it a real good, strong, thick coating everywhere. Get it really good along the edge as well. And now is kind of the time that you want to be able to sort of lift this belt buckle on up and get kind of down in there. And I can see why people would want to stain before they do this stuff, because it is a little bit of a pain to get the little sponge down in there. But I don't know, I just like working with the leather in its natural form. I feel like it just, I don't know, you can see, I feel like you can see better what you're doing with the stitching and stuff like that. So, and even though it looks relatively dark right now, I've used this walnut before and it does dry quite a bit lighter than it originally looks here. So I think that's why I'm going to be attempting to use some of the black as well. And I just lost the sponge, so that's awesome. Anyway, yeah, I'll finish getting this coated here real good with the brown, and then I'll flip it back on when we do some black and kind of show you how I'm going to apply that. Alright, so we got this thing coated pretty well with the walnut color. I'm going to be taking this brush here, and I'm going to put it in the walnut to get it wet, and basically going to get it wet and kind of dabbing off the excess, and then I'm going to dunk it into this lid that I've put a little black into and let it soak up some color. And now we've got a good mixture of black and walnut, which should help darken up the sheath. And going to try to do nice even coats on it so that we have just kind of a nice even coat on it. And it should help darken up some of the spots. But it should also still allow some of that walnut to show through so that it's not all black. And for the most part, that's really all that I intended to do for it. So now that we're basically here, I'm going to go set it out, let it dry off some out in the sun, and we'll see what it looks like once it's dried. If we need to reapply, we will. But typically, at least for me, when I coat it really well like this, one coat is normally enough for the most part. So we'll flip it back on, we'll let it dry probably, I don't know, maybe 4 hours or so outside, and that should kind of at least start to give us an idea of what it's going to look like once the thing has dried out quite a bit. So I'm gonna go stick it outside, and I'll be back here in about 4 hours and we'll take a look.
So here I am 4 hours later, working on editing the video. Just checked on the sheath. It turned out pretty good. The brown and the black
melted together pretty well to make a dark-ish sheath. I did want to say that you can also tell that it's dry and ready, not only by feeling it, but also the way that it sounds when you drop it. Kind of has that dry sound. Let me bring it out here in the sun and give you a quick look. You can kind of tell that the top is a tad bit lighter there than the bottom, which is cool, and I think it'll give it some character as it ages. Is it perfect? No, but I do like it, and for me it's pretty good. This is probably only the 4th sheath I've ever made, so I feel like each time I'm getting a little bit better and a little bit faster, which is cool. So yeah, that'll be the end of the staining. Stay tuned for one more clip, and then we'll do the outro and get out of here. So that concludes how to make a sheath, Frenchy forge style. Hey, yeah, turned out pretty good. And like I said, it looks pretty good for the knife that's in there. It's got a nice dark color with a dark handled and dark contrast knife. It fits in there really well, and it holds it pretty well. So yeah, thanks for watching.